Всем привет! Hi again! And in this lesson we are going to look at the adverbs. We learned already adjectives, and now we are going to see how we can form adverbs derived from the adjectives we learned. We are going to continue looking at the conjugation of the verbs знать and жить, to know and to live, with the first person plural, which is we. In Russian we say мы, with the second person, which is you. In Russian we say either ты or вы, and with the third person plural, in English it's they, and in Russian it's они. Then we are going to look again at the prepositional case. You remember we look at the prepositional case with the preposition в, in English in, and now we're going to look at the preposition о or об, and it's equivalent to English about. And we are going to add more verbs. So we're going to add verbs говорить, to speak, and слышать, to listen or to hear. And we're going to look at the conjugation of these verbs. These are the verbs of the second conjugation. We will use them with the pronouns of the first person, which is I, я, and of the third person, which is he, she, он, and она. And lastly, we are going to look at the pattern. What do you know? And we can look at the pattern with the blank nominative case noun. So, what blank noun do you know? For example, what houses do you know? What, I don't know. What weather do you know? What dogs do you know? So in Russian it will be какой, then noun in the nominative case, ты знаешь or вы знаете, you know. Какой дом, in singular case, ты знаешь. Какой дом вы знаете? Или какую собаку ты знаешь? Какую собаку вы знаете? And this is a stupid example, but it explains the meaning. And we are going to look at the pattern, the same question with prepositional case. So if you say, what do you know about something? Like, what do you know about Russia? Or what do you know about China? How do we ask it in Russian language? It will be что, what, что ты знаешь, or вы знаете о России, or что ты знаешь, or вы знаете об Америке. And I'll explain exactly what it means later. So let's begin. So we are going to start with our verbs жить, to live, and знать, to know. And we're going to expand our pronouns. So we looked at the first and third person. Now we're going to look at the second person, and we're going to look at our plurals for first and for the third person. So let's begin with the pronoun жить. Я живу, I live, we know that, and он, она живет, he, she lives. So we learned that. Now we're going to look at the second person, and the second person in English, you, in Russian we say ты or вы. So we use ты when it's singular and informal addressee. So it's something that you say to somebody you know, to a friend, to somebody your age. And we use вы, first of all, in plural case. So it's multiple ты, you know, вы. In English it's still you, but in Russian plural and singular are going to be different. And the second case when we say вы, it's when we use a polite or formal or more respectful form. So we say вы to somebody you don't know. We say вы to somebody who is a higher title than us. For example, I'm a manager or, I don't know, a teacher, a professor, a president. And we say it in a formal situation. So again, even if it's somebody you know, but it's a formal situation. So it might be a colleague, might be, you know, your supervisor, your manager. So we address formally and we say вы. So the endings for the second person are going to be with ты, we say ешь or ешь, and with вы, we say ете or ете. In the example with the verb to live, жить, we say ты живешь и вы живете. Ты живешь, вы живете. So now let's add our countries. We can ask a question or make a statement. Ты живешь в Америке. You remember Америке with the preposition в, and we use it in the prepositional case, so the ending is е. Ты живешь в Америке, or ты живешь в Японии. So you remember, и я в Японии changes to и in prepositional case, and we say ты живешь. And with вы, we're going to say вы живете в Америке. Or вы живете в Японии. So the endings are the same, and we change the ending depending on if we say ты or вы. Ты живешь, but вы живете. And also, in the same manner, we form a question, so nothing changes, but the intonation. Вы живете в Америке. Ты живешь в Америке. Вы живете в Японии. Ты живешь в Японии. So that was the second person. And now if you look at the first person plural, in English it's we, in Russian we say мы. The endings for the plural first person is ем or ем. So in our case we will say мы живем. Мы живем. For example, мы живем в Америке. Or мы живем в Японии. So you see, singular, plural, в Америке, в Японии didn't change. So it's still the same prepositional case. Е at the end of vowel or consonant, and ii at the end of words ending on iya, or well, with countries on iya, with other words, if it's iya or iye or ii, it's going to be ending e. And if you're looking at the plural case of the third person, which is they, in Russian we say они, они. The ending for они is going to be ut or ют. In our case, они живут в Америке. Они живут в Японии. So in this case, it's going to be ut. Они живут. So let's practice it with these sentences. Ты живешь в Польше? Or ты живешь в Китае? Он живет в Америке. Она живет в России. Они живут в Узбекистане. Они живут в Таиланде. Мы живем в Китае. Or вы живете в Болгарии. So these are the questions that we can ask. Remember how we decline our nouns and the endings. And now you need to remember how we conjugate our verbs, depending on the first person, singular, plural, the second person, singular, plural, or formal, and the third person, singular and plural. And now we're going to add another pattern. So this is the pattern that we practiced in the previous lesson, previous class, a question where or где. So now we are going to add our new conjugation to it. So it's going to be a new ending for the same verb. So we can say где ты живешь? Где ты живешь? As a question, or где ты живешь as a statement, but it's a question. So где ты живешь? Or где вы живете? Где вы живете? Or где мы живем? Где мы живем? Где они живут? Где они живут? So you can practice these 4 questions with the conjugation that we just learned. Где ты живешь? Где вы живете? Где мы живем? И где они живут? And the exercise for this assignment is going to be focused on the conjugation of the verb to live, of the verb жить. So I want you to ask a question. Ты живешь в России? Вы живете в России? Мы живем в России? And они живут в России? but you're going to choose your country. You're going to use your country for these questions. So there are going to be 4 questions where you're going to practice the conjugation and you're going to use your country. So you're still going to decline your country and use it in the prepositional case with the preposition v. So for me, it's going to be, I'm not going to say America because I know some of you live in America, so I'm going to say Russia instead. So, вы живете в России. Ты живешь в России, мы живем в России, and они живут в России. And so that's going to be your exercise for this lesson. So then the next verb that we're practicing is the verb знать, to know. So we learned it with the first person and the third person. Я знаю, он, она знает. And now we're going to learn the same with the second person, with the first person plural and the third person plural. So, and as I told you already, the second person is going to be the ending ешь or ёшь. So in this case, we say ты знаешь. Ты знаешь. And when we say plural вы or our respectful вы, we say ете or ёте. So in this case, we say вы знаете. Вы знаете. And when we talk about plural I, which is we, in Russian we say again, sorry, I'm repeating myself, but in Russian we say мы, so we say ем or ем. In this case, it's ем. Мы знаем. Мы знаем. And when we say plural third person, which is они, they, we say ut or ют. So in this case, we say они знают. Они знают. Okay, so just remember that we are going to add more layers on top of these forms, right? Я знаю, ты знаешь, вы знаете, он, она знает, они знают, и мы знаем. So just remember this for now. So now we're going to look at the pattern. What do you know? And what do you know about? So the first one, what do you know? After what? We have a noun that we want to ask question about. So in Russian we say какой, which is what, but like what kind, which. Какой noun ты знаешь, or вы знаете, or я знаю, мы знаем, они знают, он знает. So we'll start with ты знаешь, or вы знаете. So we can say, какой язык ты знаешь? What language do you know? Or respectful or plural, we can say, какой язык вы знаете? What language do you know? And you can answer, я знаю английский язык. So these are still our adjectives. Я знаю английский язык. Я знаю русский язык. Я знаю немецкий язык. Я знаю японский язык. I know this kind of language. We can say, какой язык они знают. Какой язык они знают? And the answer will be, они знают русский язык, американский язык, английский язык. Well, there is no американский язык, but английский язык, немецкий язык, болгарский язык, тайский язык, китайский язык, and so on. Now, if you want to ask a question, what do you know about? And if you say you, then we use either ты or вы. And then ты and вы are going to be after the question. And in this case, we're using the question actually what, which is что. So we can say, что ты знаешь о, and then the noun in prepositional case. Or что вы знаете о, and then the noun in prepositional case. So, for example, что ты знаешь о России? What do you know about Russia? Or что вы знаете о России? What do you know about Russia? Polite or plural, addressee. So again, we have the ending in prepositional case. So all of the countries that we learned in prepositional case, we use in the same manner, but now we have our new preposition, about. And in Russian we say or об. So we use об with the B when a noun or a country in our case is going to start with a vowel. So the consonant B separates two vowels. So we can say, что ты знаешь об Америке? Что ты знаешь об Америке? Что ты знаешь об Англии? Что ты знаешь об Англии? We don't say it about Japan. I was actually thinking about it. So we say, что ты знаешь о Японии? Because in this case, the vowel я is pronounced as y-a. So if you remember our alphabet video, y-a, and because y considered a consonant, we actually say, что ты знаешь о Японии? So when it starts with я, and because it's in the beginning, it's pronounced as y-a, and we don't use preposition об, we use preposition or. But these are just some polishing things that I want you to know. So, remember, we say, что ты знаешь о России, что вы знаете о России, что ты знаешь о Японии, что вы знаете о Японии, что ты знаешь об Америке, что вы знаете об Америке. And I forgot to add all of our pronouns. So we can now practice the same question with all of the pronouns that we know. Что? Well, let's choose what we all know, Америка, right? So we will say, что ты знаешь об Америке, что вы знаете об Америке, что мы знаем об Америке, что я знаю об Америке, что он знает об Америке, что она знает об Америке, что они знают об Америке. Now let's look at our table with countries again, and we are looking at the countries in nominative case, countries that are ending in «я», «а», and the consonant. So for example, Anglia, Россия, Япония, Германия. And we have countries ending on «r», America, Polsha, Litva, and countries that end on a consonant, Китай, Thailand, and Uzbekistan, for example. And now we are looking at our prepositional case. So for prepositional case, with the preposition or, which is about, we ask a question about what? Что ты знаешь о России? What do you know about Russia? So then again, the prepositional case changes exactly the same with the preposition or. We will say об Англии, о Японии, о России, о Германии, об Америке, о Литве, о Польше, о Китае, о Таиланде, об Узбекистане. So again, и я change to e endings, vowel and consonant change to ye, but now we added the preposition о. And again, we can use it in a question. Что ты знаешь об and the country? Что вы знаете о and the country? Что они, что мы, and so on. So now we're learning pronouns, conjugation of the verbs, and the endings. So then important part of this lesson is to learn new verbs and also adverbs. So first new verbs that we are going to learn are the verbs говорить, to speak, и слышать, to hear or to listen. And we're going to pair these verbs with the countries that we, been practicing for 4 lessons. But before we do that, I want to teach you how to form adverbs, and we form adverbs but using our adjectives and the prefix por and suffix e. So if we are taking masculine adjective, русский, американский, английский, японский, болгарский, тайский, китайский, and so on, we are going to take that e ending and replace it with just single e. So single e indicates that it's adverb. And we're going to add our prefix with the hyphen, по. So we will get по-русски, по-американски, по-английски, по-китайски, and so on. Simple. We take e, change it to e, and we add the prefix по. Now we're going to learn our verbs, so we can say I speak English or I speak Russian, because with the verb speak we cannot use adjectives, we need to use adverbs. So now we know our adverbs and we'll be able to say I speak Russian, I speak English. Говорить, to speak, and слышать, to hear, to listen, are verbs of the second conjugation. And there is only a tiny difference in the ending between the first conjugation and second conjugation. And like we did before, we're going to start with the first person, I, which is я, and the third person, he, she, which is он and она. So with the first person, я, we have the endings of the verbs that belongs to the second conjugation, endings u and you. Which is what? Which is the same as the verbs of the first conjugation. I know. But the third conjugation are going to use the ending it versus the yet, yot, ending that we used for the first conjugation. So that's the main difference. Where we had ye, you remember ем, йом, ет, ешь, ете are going to be и, it, им, ите. So that's the main difference between first and second conjugation. First one has ye or yo, and the second has и. So the infinitive form of the verb to speak, говорить. And in the first person I will say я говорю. And in the third person we will say он or она говорит. Я говорю по-русски. Я говорю по-английски. Он говорит по-русски. Она говорит по-английски. And the same thing we are going to do with the verb слышать. Я слышу. So я говорю and я слышу. And он, она говорит and он, она слышит. So it's always going to be it in the third person. Я говорю, я слышу. Он говорит, он слышит. Она говорит, она слышит. So now let's just look at the examples with more variations of the verbs, adverbs and pronouns that we just learned. Он говорит по-литовски. He speaks Lithuanian. Она говорит по-болгарски. She speaks Bulgarian. Я говорю по-тайски. I speak Thai. This is not true, but still. Он живет по-американски. He lives American way. Я слышу немецкий язык. I hear German language. Она слышит хорошо. She hears well. Он слышит не очень хорошо. He hears not so well. Я слышу плохо. So that's a new word for you. Плохо. It's the adverb. Means badly. I hear badly. Practice all of these patterns. And thank you for staying with me, and thank you for your homework from today's lesson.